The story of WISHA Was a Writer is the story of a 10-year-old girl called WISHA who wishes more than anything else in the world to become a writer. And she meets a bookworm and she takes a ride on the Thought Express and she goes to all kinds of magical, crazy places. And the book is pretty much a metaphor for the act of writing and for any creative journey and where that journey might take you. So this book is meant for basically 7 to 12-year-olds. Though I've been surprised to find that at some schools they're taking it up to standard 8, which should be 14-year-olds, and it is also being read out loud to kids who are 5. So I'm a little cagey about pinning down a target audience for the book, but ideally it would be about 7 to 10 to 12 years old. Well, I wrote the first half of the book 6 years ago when I just had my first baby and I was on on maternity leave from my job because I used to be a journalist and I used to write for Outlook magazine. So I'd always wanted to be a writer and I decided to try writing a book. And the first idea I had was the title itself, because there I was sitting in front of a blank computer and saying I wish I was a writer, and then WISHA Was a Writer just cropped up out of nowhere, and the name came first and the story followed later. And pretty much WISHA is me, so it is a semi-autobiographical book, if not completely autobiographical. And I wrote the first half of it and then I got stuck. I didn't know where to take WISHA anymore, and I put the book on the side and I completely forgot and went back to journalism. 6 years later, I happened to contact Penguin with another submission I had, and they said, "We love your style of writing, is there anything else you can show us?" And all I could dig up from my old documents was this half-written WISHA Was a Writer. So I sent it off to them without correcting it, without looking at it again. And within 10 minutes I got a phone call and they said, "Where's the other half?" I said, "I haven't written it." And they said, "Is it in your head?" I said, "It's not even in my head." So they said, "Well, write it as fast as you can because we are signing you on." So that's how the adventure of WISHA took off. And then when I wrote the second half, I put in a chapter about how WISHA faces a writer's block, because I'd been there and I'd faced it for 6 years, and now I understood it so much better. And when I read the book 6 years later, everything that had dogged me about the book in the beginning became so much clearer. And when I left this book 6 years ago, when I gave up on it, I felt that I didn't know how to end the book. That's what got me all flummoxed. And when I went back to it, the ending was right in front of me. It was right there. And then it was very obvious how the book should end, and the book just kind of wrote itself. Well, pretty much she was partly me, but the book was also supposed to be a sort of like a manual or a recipe book for how you write a novel. So what I needed was to put together all those ingredients, like you need a good structure, or you need good style, or you need an idea, or you need your imagination, or any of the other things that you need to write a compelling book. And what I did is I turned the book into a sort of fable where a very abstract notion got concrete form. So, for example, imagination is an abstract idea, but in the book it turns up as something called an imagination balloon, which is a rather deflated red balloon, and WISHA finds herself holding this balloon and doesn't know what to do with it. And then when she starts blowing into it, she blows her entire imagination into the balloon, and everything that's caught up in her head actually gets caught up in that balloon. So I started giving physical form to very abstract ideas. And that was also me trying kind of playing around with the powerful notion of being a writer and all the tools that are at your disposal. It is fantasy because it is, well, she goes to the marketplace of ideas, she takes a ride on the Thought Express, she goes to the circus of bad form where she sees all those books that are badly written and how they can be part of this big giant freak show, you know. So all of it is completely fictionalized and fantasy based. It is a fantasy book. Well, I thought of WISHA obviously right away, and by page 2 I already knew that she needed to meet a bookworm. So, I mean, you know, the story just grew out of itself, which is a very sick cliched thing to say, and is generally said by writers when they've actually been secretly working on the side and scribbling out plot outlines and alternatives, but it is really pretty much wrote itself. And the bookworm cropped up on page 2, and then they take these adventures together. And then by the time I'd written the first half, which was 6 years ago, I had the bookworm, I had WISHA, and I had this purple mouse. But thereafter I said, I don't know why this mouse is purple, I don't know why this mouse is even there. And then I was starting to question everything and I decided to stop. And I really did not think the story would see the light of day. And it was only when Penguin expressed such interest and said, you know, we love it so much, we'll sign you on, that I kind of reignited my passion for the book, went back to it, and when I read it 6 years later, I still loved it, which I thought was a good sign, you know. And then somehow it made it quite obvious what that purple mouse was doing in the book. And then I knew that she also needed a villain, so that's when I introduced a villain and gave him a role in the book, because every good book requires a complication or a villain or some sort of battle that the hero or the heroine has to wage. It's wicked, it's funny. I don't talk down to children. I don't think you can talk down to children. They can possibly in this day and age talk down to you. So, and I'm not trying to teach anybody anything great about life. I'm not pretending to be profound, and there is no moral, but I am trying to tell a fun story, and I think that's what basically kids are looking for. And I'm trying to tell them that there is a certain magic in doing anything creative, and whether you turn it into a fantasy or whether you actually embark on something creative on your own and discover for yourself how magical it is, the creative journey has a lot of surprises, and I guess that's what I was trying to throw up. You know, as a journalist, I felt fettered by the facts, and I wanted to be set free. And all my life, ever since I was I think 8 or 9, I've been writing a lot of poetry, and I always wanted to write, and I was surrounded by a lot of encouraging people who read all the drivel I wrote and said it was fabulous, which is a great way to get started. And I think I got into journalism because I think there's an immense pressure to justify what you do, especially when you're fresh out of college and all your friends are gravitating towards fields that make a lot of money. And then if you say, all I'm going to do is pursue a course in creative writing, they're like, what is that supposed to mean? What's going to come out at the end of it? And very often when you embark on this whole idea of I want to be a writer, you have to also face the prospect of spending 3 years and at the end of it not having a book. You know, so I think that left me very daunted. And I felt journalism was a safer bet, and I also felt it was a good pit stop, and it tends to be a pit stop for a lot of writers, and unfortunately a lot of writers land up getting stuck there for the rest of their lives. But if you look at Hemingway or maybe other people as well, a lot of people started out being journalists, and I think it's a good place to pick up stories as well. So I felt maybe I would pick up some life experiences and some stories being a journalist. Then I landed up feeling very enslaved by the facts, and I decided that, you know, this is what I want to do, and I was already in my mid-30s, so I said better now than later, and decided to take my chances pretty much. I used to live in Japan, in Tokyo, and I was the editor at the Japan Times, and he used to illustrate, he used to do a cartoon every day for the Japan Times. He still does. He's prolific and he's fantastically talented, and I did a children's book review column for the Japan Times, and I requested him to illustrate it for me, and he did a wonderful job. Then after that, for 6-8 years we had no contact, and when I wrote this book I was very worried, because I felt that the make or break thing for this book would be the illustrations, and I needed somebody who could approach it the same crazy bizarre way and not just slavishly illustrate what I had written. I think a good illustrator should create a set of illustrations that can be parallelly read as separate text on their own, that can be independently read of the text, you know. So I wanted somebody like that, and then I thought of him, and I went on to Google Maps and I found his house, and then I found his email address, and then I wrote to him after all those years, and we've never actually met. So then over email, he got on board, he read the book, he loved it, he said, okay, I'm on board, and that's how it all began. And it was a first, I think, for Penguin as well, because typically they don't allow their authors to choose an illustrator. So I said, fair enough, but I'll just give you one of his illustrations and then you decide. And I got him to illustrate just one scene from the book. It was fabulous, and I just gave it to them, they were bowled over, and they said, we'll go for it.